Hey guys, welcome back. Thanks for being here. Um, I decided that I want to read through chapters 10 and 13 from book one before we do book two. And chapter 10 is about, it's just called Can We Be Happy During Our Lifetime? Um, I really don't plan to explain too much more in Aristotle. I don't want to. I don't want to break down like everything. We don't have time for that. What I do want to do is read the text that I sourced when I give you the explanation up front. So, um, in this chapter, right, can we be happy during our lifetime? We're thinking about whether eudaimonia is something that can be, I think, understood or appreciated, uh, during someone's experience, or is it only something that you can judge the complete happiness once it's lived the whole way through the life? And I'm sure there's some good stuff in here. I don't know everything in here, and I can't really like summarize it more than that. So again, we're just gonna read. Let's make sure we're screen sharing. Yay. Okay. Book one, chapter 10, Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle. Can we be happy during our lifetime? Then, should we count no human being happy during his lifetime, but follow Solon's advice to wait to see the end? But if we agree with Solon, can someone really be happy during the time after he has died? Surely that is completely absurd, especially when we say happiness is an activity. So living well, I think, is something you can judge and enjoy. Eudaimonia, happiness, is something that you can enjoy, right? Remember that happiness in this translation means eudaimonia. And when I say eudaimonia, it's what you're thinking of as happiness, but it means living well. And it's the complete good, the complete happiness. He said a bunch of other things about it too. It's a multiplicitous good. It's diverse. You have different kinds of happinesses. Um, you have, the happiness of reading a book is different from the happiness of going to a beach, and the happiness of reading this book is different from the happiness of reading that book, um, etc. Or doing it on that day with that friend, right? Or the day after something stressful was relieved, or you succeeded at something, or all sorts of conditions that build and diversify and contextualize Aristotle's, well, contextualize happiness or well-being or what you feel or what you experience and how you evaluate things. And Aristotle's theory is flexible enough to and reasonable enough to incorporate all that. Um, we do not say then that someone is happy during the time he is dead, and Solon's point is not this absurd one, but rather that when a human being has died, we can safely pronounce that he was blessed before he died, on the assumption that he is now finally beyond evils and misfortunes that might change the course of the overall evaluation, or that might if you, I think the idea is that if you're living a great life at 80 years old and then the last 10 years, something really terrible happens. Um, Something like that is what they want to avoid. But this claim is also disputable, for if a living person has good or evil of which he is not aware, a dead person also, it seems, has good or evil if, for instance, he receives honors or dishonors and has children and descendants in general, do well or suffer misfortune. So Aristotle then says basically, uh, even the dead person can still suffer or thrive if who and what they care about, and whom what they persisted on as does well or suffers. However, this conclusion also raises a puzzle. For even if someone has lived in blessedness until old age and has died appropriately, many fluctuations of his descendants' fortunes may still happen to him. For some may be good people and get the life they deserve, while the contrary may be true of others, and clearly they may be as distantly related to their ancestor as you please. So he's going back and forth about his positions, and so maybe I'll avoid breaking down each side that he considers. Surely then it would be an absurd result if the dead person's condition changed along with the fortunes of his descendants, so that at one time he would turn out to have been happy in his lifetime, and in another time he would turn out to have been miserable. But it would also be absurd if the condition of descendants did not affect their ancestors at all, or for any length of time. We must return to the previous puzzle, since that will perhaps also show us the answer to our present question. Let us grant that we must wait to see the end, and must then count someone blessed, not as now being blessed during the time he is dead, but because he previously was blessed. Would it not be absurd then, if at the very time when he is happy, we refuse to ascribe truly to him the happiness he has? Such refusal results from reluctance to call him happy during his lifetime because of its ups and downs. For we suppose happiness is enduring and definitely not prone to fluctuate. But the same person's fortunes often turn to and fro. For clearly, if we take our cue from his fortunes, we shall often call him happy and then miserable again, thereby representing the happy person as a kind of chameleon, insecurely based. I read Candide for the first time this past year, and borrowed it from a colleague, which was very fun. And the main character, it's by Voltaire. The main character in Candide, who is named Candide, Candide, it's a male protagonist who is an optimist, meaning they believe that this is the best possible world, and it's always the best possible world, but they kind of vacillate between that and seeing the horrors of it all. So I'm just from thinking of that. Uh, the fortunes to and fro, because I mean, in Candide, like Voltaire is even more terse than Aristotle. The plot is just every sentence is something different happening. It's a really fast book. I mean, I was really surprised. It was, um, but surely it is quite wrong to take our cue from someone's fortunes, for his doing well or badly does not rest on them, on the fortunes. A human life, as we said, needs these added, but activities in accord with virtue control happiness, and the contrary activities control its contrary. Fortunes don't control the virtues of the soul, basically. Indeed, the present puzzle is further evidence for our account of happiness. For no human achievement has the stability of activities in accord with virtue, since these seem to be more enduring even than our knowledge of the sciences. Indeed, the most honorable among the virtues themselves are more enduring than the other virtues, because blessed people devote their lives to them more fully and more continually than to anything else. For this continual activity would seem to be the reason we do not forget them. It follows then that the happy person has the stability we are looking for, and keeps the character he has throughout his life. For always, or more than anything else, he will do and study the actions in accord with virtue, and will bear fortunes most finely, in every way and in all conditions appropriately, since he is truly good, foursquare, and blameless. Now we're on section 12 of book 1, still chapter 12, 10, book 1, chapter 10, section 12, just kind of updating us. Um, there's only less than, well, there's like 3/4 of a page left in this section. A little over halfway through, basically, this first book, first chapter for this video, this episode. Many events, however, are subject to fortune. Some are minor, some major. Hence, minor strokes of good or ill fortune clearly will not carry any weight for his life. But many major strokes of good fortune will make it more blessed, for in themselves they naturally add adornment to it, and his use of them proves to be fine and excellent. Conversely, if he suffers many major misfortunes, they oppress and spoil his blessedness, since they involve pain, and impede many activities. And yet, even here, what is fine shines through. Whenever someone bears many severe misfortunes with good temper, not because he feels no distress, but because he is noble and magnanimous. I was teaching a lecture on Buddhism for world religions today. And so we were talking about the middle way and not running from, of, the middle way being between desire and fear, not avoiding both of those, not really having them, but things arise and dissipate. Because there's neither running nor coming, neither chasing nor going. Um, and so in that you take the mantra, the short epithet, the mantra was to take the joys and sorrows as the path. And obviously it's like, yeah, take joy and sorrow. Obviously, accept what comes, acceptance, going with the flow. Those things are very obviously Buddhist. What wasn't obvious was as the path, right? Which means that even when something negative happens, something majorly negative, um, one way of honoring the tragedy is to do your best to learn from it and protect others and move forward. To turn, and this is also the Buddhist lesson, to turn the grief and the tragedy, the sorrow, the suffering, to turn the suffering into compassion, into forgiveness, into grace, into loving kindness, into patience, into effort, into a right effort, um, continual effort. Forget the Sanskrit words for it all and the Pali words. I forget the distinctions between those things. But and since section 13, and since it is activities that control life, as we said, no blessed person could ever become miserable, since he will never do hateful and bad and base actions. For a truly good and prudent person, we suppose, will bear strokes of fortune suitably, and from his resources at any time will do the finest actions, just as a good general will make the best use of his forces in war, and a good shoemaker will make the finest shoe from the hides given to him. There's a little gnat here. I think I got it. Give it with my hand. Will make the finest shoe from the hides given to him, and similarly for all other craftsmen. So, a good person with good character who is truly happy. If they're happy, they have all these things, they have good character, and everything else will flow naturally from there. But in another sense, you have to habituate these things to become happy and then know how to emanate a sustenance of the happiness. But that kind of person will probably do their best, and we will all probably, I mean, section 14, if this is so, the happy person could never become miserable, but neither will he be blessed if he falls into misfortunes as bad as Priam's. Nor, however, will he be inconstant and prone to fluctuate, since he will neither be easily shaken from his happiness nor shaken by just any misfortunes. He will be shaken from it, though, by many serious misfortunes, and from these a return to happiness will take no short time. At best, it will take a long and complete length of time that includes great and fine successes. Section 15. Then why not say that the happy person is the one whose activities accord with complete virtue? Sorry, Section 14, they're just saying that if there's a lot of bad things happening to you, it's almost impossible to live a good life. Um, and if a few bad good things happen, or sorry, if a few bad things happen to you, and or many bad things happen to you, it might be possible to still live a good life, but it will take some length of time that includes, quote, some great So, quote, it will take a long and complete length of time that includes great and fine successes. Then why not say that the happy person is the one whose activities accord with complete virtue, with an adequate supply of external goods, not for just any time, but for a complete life? Or should we add that he will also go on living this way and will come to an appropriate end, since the future is not apparent to us, and we take happiness to be the end, and altogether complete in every way? Given section 16, last few sentences. Given these facts about about the future and about happiness, we shall say that a living person who has and will keep the goods we mentioned is blessed, but blessed as a human being is. So much for a determination of this question. Those goods include the complete good, happiness. We're skipping 11 and 12, going to 13. Introduction to the Virtues. It's the last chapter in book one, and I just thought it was kind of worth including in a comprehensive overview where we have the time to dig in. Um, I I didn't assign it in the syllabus for like my intro class, and it's not even included in their PDF, but it is in my annotations. It is on my website. Um, 10 it wasn't either. But yeah, I think it'll help us with book two. Chapter 13, Introduction to the Virtues. I know at least that Aristotle is going to distinguish virtues of character from virtues of, I think, thought or virtues of the soul. And he's kind of, um, yeah, virtues of thought and virtues of character. And they roughly correspond with the rational and non-rational parts of the soul, roughly. I say that tentatively because I haven't reread this closely before reading it for here. I don't think that's an issue. Um, because I know the material and I can explain whatever is like confusing. Okay. And watching me, listening to me process stuff that's like not fully understood or me being a little confused is useful um, to just kind of like organically narrate what you might be wondering about. Versus if I understand it super well, I might not explain things as much because I understand it really well and I don't realize how much explanation it might need. Anyway, it's going to be great. Introduction to the Virtues. Book one, chapter 13, section one. Since happiness is a certain sort of activity of the soul, and this is eudaimonia as well. So activity meaning that it's an ongoing thing that you do and you partake in an experience, and it's through time, and it's in a world, or there seems to be some environment. Dewey talks about the mind as having an environment, all the adumbrations that arise and dissipate. Adumbrations are edges of a perception that include the rest of the world. Um, Tough phenomenologists see it. Adumbrations. Adumbrations. Adumbrated perceptions. You could look those things up. They're not really what we're talking about here. Um, but activity, right? So it's mobile, it's through time, it's through space. I got distracted thinking about the mental environment. So, as I said, it has to take up space because it's an activity. Thought is an activity, right? And it isn't necessarily extended. It might be benefited by writing or reading, or some other kind of external tool, but it's fundamentally an experience. You can think through painting, you can think through reading, you can think through dancing, you can think through observing, walking. Since happiness is a certain sort of activity of the soul in accord with complete virtue, we must examine virtue, for that will perhaps also be a way to study happiness better. Moreover, the true politician seems to have put more effort into virtue than into anything else, since he wants to make the citizens good and law-abiding. We find an example of this in the Spartan and Cretan legislators, and in any others who share their concerns. Since, then, the examination of virtue is proper for political science, the inquiry clearly suits our decision at the beginning. It is clear that the virtue we must examine is human virtue, since we are also seeking the human good and human happiness. By human virtue, we mean virtue of the soul, not of the body, since we also say that happiness is an activity of the soul. If this is so, it is clear that the politician must in some way know about the soul, just as someone setting out to heal the eyes must know about the whole body as well. This is all the more true to the extent that political science is better and more honorable than medicine, even among doctors. The cultivated ones devote a lot of effort to finding out about the body. Hence, the politician as well as the student of nature must study the soul, but he must study it for his specific purpose, far enough for his inquiry into virtue. For a more exact treatment would presumably take more effort than his purpose requires. Section 9. We have discussed the soul sufficiently for our purposes in our popular works, as well as our less popular, and we should use this discussion. We have said, for instance, that one part of the soul is non-rational, while one has reason. Are these distinguished as parts of a body, and everything divisible into parts are? Or are they two only in definition and inseparable by nature, as the convex and the concave are in a surface? It does not matter for present purposes. I think they're indivisible, inseparable. Consider the non-rational part. One part of it, i.e., the cause of nutrition and growth, would seem to be plant-like and shared with all living things. For we can ascribe this capacity of the soul to everything that is nourished, including embryos, and the same capacity to full-grown living things, since this is more reasonable than to ascribe another capacity to them. Hence, the virtue of this capacity is apparently shared, not specifically human. For this part and this capacity, more than others, seem to be active in sleep, and here the good and the bad person are least distinct. Hence, happy people are said to be no better off than miserable people for half their lives. This lack of distinction is not surprising, since sleep is inactivity of the soul, insofar as it is called excellent or base. Unless to some small extent some movements penetrate to our awareness, and in this way the decent person comes to have better images and dreams than just any random person has. Enough about this, however, and let us leave aside the nutritive part, since by nature it has no share in human virtue. Uh, I think dreams are probably some reflection of what you've experienced and how well you've processed it. And sometimes processing is penance and sometimes it's not. And when it's penance, that means you've changed your karma. And when it's not, then it means you've healed. So either you change your karma from something you did wrong, or you heal from something that happened to you. Either way, you process what you've been through or what you've experienced, whether you've done it or undergone it. And if you don't do those things, then the dreams, I think, can bring about what you're not resolving. not in a super symbolic way, just like whatever feeling you feel in the dream is probably a feeling that you need to feel or have been feeling but haven't noticed or paid attention to. Section 15. Another nature in the soul would also seem to be non-rational, though in a way it shares in reason. For in the continent and the incontinent person, we praise their reason, that is to say, the part of the soul that has reason, because it exhorts them correctly and toward what is best. But they evidently also have in them some other part that is by nature something apart from reason, clashing and struggling with reason. For just as paralyzed parts of a body, when we decide to move them to the right, do the contrary and move off to the left, the same is true of the soul. For incontinent people have impulses in contrary directions. In bodies, admittedly, we see the part go astray, whereas we do not see it in the soul. Nonetheless, presumably, we should suppose that the soul also has something apart from reason, countering and opposing reason. The precise way it is different does not matter. However, this part as well is the rational part, so it's like the edge of reason that is non-reason. However, this part as well as the rational part appears, as we said, to share in reason. At any rate, in the continent person, it obeys reason, and in the temperate and the brave person, it presumably listens still better to reason, since there it agrees with reason in everything. The non-rational part, then, as well as the whole soul, apparently has two parts. For while the plant-like part shares in reason, not at all, the part with appetites and in general desires shares in reason, in a way, insofar as it both listens to reason and obeys it. This is the way in which we are said to, quote, listen to reason from, end quote, from father or friends, as opposed to the way in which we give the reason in mathematics. The non-rational part also obeys and is persuaded in some way by reason, as is shown by correction, and by every sort of reproof and exhortation. If then we ought to say that this part also has reason, then the part that has reason as well as the non-rational part will have two parts. One will have reason fully by having it within itself, the other will have reason by listening to reason as to a father. The division between virtues accords with this difference. For some virtues are called virtues of thought, which are the ones having reason fully by themselves, the rational part of the soul. Others called virtues of character. Wisdom, comprehension, and prudence are called virtues of thought. Generosity and temperance, virtues of character. For when we speak of someone's character, we do not say that he is wise or has good comprehension, but that he is gentle or temperate. And yet we also praise the wise person for his state, and the states that are praiseworthy are the ones we call virtues. Yay! So we're going to move on to book 2. Book 2, chapter 1, section 1. How a virtue, book 2 is just called Virtue of Character. Well, I don't know if that goes on for... It might just be that book 2, which is what most of what we read that I think is super important, is all about character. I've called it virtue ethics, but virtue of thought might be in more of his metaphysics, like we were reading about earlier in the introduction. I think that's books 5 and 6. All right, book 2. We'll probably keep this pretty short. This episode, we're at 30 minutes. So virtue then is of two, how a virtue of character is acquired. Virtue then is of two sorts, virtue of thought and virtue of character. Virtue of thought arises and grows mostly from teaching. That is why it needs experience and time. Virtue of character, i.e., of ethos, results from habit, ethos, hence its name ethical, slightly varied from ethos. Section 2. Hence, it is also clear that none of the virtues of character arises in us naturally. For if something is by nature in one condition, habituation cannot bring it into another condition. A stone, for instance, by nature moves downwards, and habituation could not make it move upwards, not even if you threw it up 10,000 times to habituate it. Nor could habituation make fire move downwards, or breathing anything that is by nature in one condition into another condition. But we obviously have the virtues. And so the virtues arise in us neither by nature nor against nature. Rather, we are by nature able to acquire them, and we are completed through habit. Further, if something arises in us by nature, we first have the capacity for it, and later perform the activity. This is clear in the case of the senses, for we did not acquire them by frequent seeing or hearing, but we already had them when we exercised them, and did not get them by exercising them. Virtues, by contrast, we acquire just as we acquire crafts, by having first activated them. For we learn a craft by producing the same product that we must produce when we have learned it. We become builders, for instance, by building. And we become harpists by playing the harp. Similarly, then, we become just by doing just actions, temperate by doing temperate actions, brave by doing brave actions. So we activate them through practice. What goes on in cities is also evidence for this, for the legislator makes the citizens good by habituating them, and this is the wish of every legislator. If he fails to do it well, he misses his goal. Correct habituation distinguishes a good political system from a bad one. Further, the sources and means that develop each virtue also ruin it, just as they do in a craft. For playing the harp makes both good and bad harpists, and it is analogous in the case of builders and all the rest. For building well makes good builders, and building badly makes bad ones. Otherwise, no teacher would be needed, but everyone would be born a good or a bad craftsman. It is the same then with the virtues. So virtues are edges, they can be good or bad. When they're bad, they're called vices, but it's the same, it's on a continuum. For what we do in our dealings with other people makes some of us just, some unjust. What we do in terrifying situations and the habits of fear or confidence that we acquire make some of us brave and others cowardly. The same is true of situations involving appetites and anger. For one or another sort of conduct in these situations makes some temperate and mild, others intemperate and irascible. To sum it up in a single account, a state of character results from the repetition of similar activities. That is why we must perform the right activities, since differences in these imply corresponding differences in the states. It is not unimportant, then, to acquire one sort of habit or another, right from our youth. On the contrary, it is very important, indeed all important. Start strong. Chapter 2. Habituation. Our present discussion does not aim, as our others do, at study. For the purpose of our examination is not to know what virtue is, but to become good, since otherwise the inquiry would be of no benefit to us, and so we must examine the right ways of acting. For as we have said, the actions also control the sorts of states we acquire. First, then, actions should accord with the correct reason. That is a common belief, and let us assume it. We shall discuss it later, and say what the correct reason is, and how it is related to the other virtues. But let us take it as agreed in advance that every account of the actions we must do has to be stated in outline, not exactly, As we also said at the beginning, the type of accounts we demand should accord with the subject matter, and questions about actions and expediency, like questions about health, have no fixed answers. So there's no like universal legalism or literalism that could be produced. Um, this is what distinguishes it from deontology in particular, Kant's universal laws. Um, there's certainly, the universal law of the soul of reason for Kant is not something that you can or need to translate. It's something everybody does because they know it's the right thing to do. Um, Now that being said, it is still like very strictly universal and legalistic. And it doesn't account for the complexity of situations the way that Aristotle can. All right, scroll down. Section 4, still chapter 2, still book 2. While this is the character of our general account, the account of particular cases is still more inexact, for these fall under no craft or profession. The agents themselves must consider in each case what the opportune action is, as doctors and navigators do. This is what I was just saying. The account we offer, then, in our present inquiry is of this inexact sort. Still, we must try to offer help. Fine. First, then, we should observe that these sorts of states naturally tend to be ruined by excess and deficiency. We see this happen with strength and health, for we must use evident cases such as these as witnesses to things that are not evident, for both excessive and deficient exercise ruin bodily strength, and similarly, too much or too little eating or drinking ruins health, whereas the proportionate amount produces, increases, and preserves it. This is what he'll call the mean later on, the proportionate amount, and the amount appropriate to each person. The same is true then of temperance, or like moderation, not overindulging, bravery, and the other virtues. For if, for instance, someone avoids and is afraid of everything, standing firm against nothing, he becomes cowardly. If he is afraid of nothing at all and goes to face everything, he becomes rash. Similarly, if he gratifies himself with every pleasure and abstains from none, he becomes intemperate. If he avoids them all, as boors do, he becomes some sort of insensible person. Temperance and bravery, then, are ruined by excess and deficiency, but preserved by the mean. So that's the first time he's using, in our reading of the text, that's the first time we've seen him use the word, I think. Section 8. But these actions are not only the sources and causes both of the emergence and growth of virtues and of their ruin. The activities of the virtues, once we have acquired them, also consist in these same actions. I may have read this page in an earlier lecture, but I don't think we've read the entirety, so we're going to do it. For this is also true of more evident cases. Strength, for instance, arises from eating a lot and from withstanding much hard labor, and it is the strong person who is most capable of these very actions. It is the same with the virtues. For abstaining from pleasure makes us become temperate, and once we have become temperate, we are most capable of abstaining from pleasures. It is similar with bravery. Habituation and disdain for frightening situations, and in standing firm against them, makes us become brave, and once we have become brave, we shall be most capable of standing firm. Chapter 3. The importance of pleasure and pain. But we must take someone's pleasure or pain following on his actions to be a sign of his state. For if someone who abstains from bodily pleasures enjoys the abstinence itself, he is temperate. If he is grieved by it, he is intemperate. Again, if he stands firm against terrifying situations and enjoys it, or at least does not find it painful, he is brave. If he finds it painful, he is cowardly. for virtue of character is about pleasures and pains. So you not only have to do the right thing, but you have to enjoy the right thing. And if you don't enjoy it yet, that means you're not a good person yet, or you're not good at it yet. Probably not good at it yet. It should be easy. For pleasure causes us to do base actions, and pain causes us to abstain from fine ones. That is why we need to have had the appropriate upbringing, right from early youth, as Plato says, to make us find enjoyment or pain in the right things. For this is the correct education. Further, virtues are concerned with actions and feelings, but every feeling and every action implies pleasure or pain. Hence, for this reason, too, virtue is about pleasures and pains. Corrective treatments also indicate this, since they use pleasures and pains. For correction is a form of medical treatment, and medical treatment naturally operates through contraries. Further, as we said earlier, every state of soul is naturally related to and about whatever naturally makes it better or worse. And pleasures and pains make people base, from pursuing and avoiding the wrong ones at the wrong time in the wrong ways, or whatever other distinctions of that sort are needed in an account. These bad effects of pleasure and pain are the reason why people actually define the virtues as being ways of being unaffected and undisturbed by pleasures and pains. They are wrong, however, because they speak of being unaffected without qualification, not of being unaffected in the right or wrong way, at the right or wrong time, and the added qualifications. So all the context, all of the things that change, all the particulars, the qualifications, the dependencies, the contingencies. And you do want to be affected sometimes by pleasures and pains. There are appropriate circumstances to be affected by pleasures and pains. Survival, grief, anger, injustice. We assume then, urgency, we assume then that virtue is the sort of state that does the best actions concerning pleasures and pains, and that vice is the contrary state. The following will also make it evident that virtue and vice are about the same things, for there are three objects of choice, fine, expedient, and pleasant, and three objects of avoidance, their contraries, shameful, harmful, and painful. About all these, then, the good person is correct and the bad person is in error, and especially about pleasure. For pleasure is shared with animals, and implied by every object of choice, since what is fine and what is expedient appear pleasant as well. Further, pleasure grows up with all of us from infancy on. That is why it is hard to rub out this feeling that has died into our lives. We also estimate actions as well as feelings, some of us more, some less, by pleasure and pain. For this reason, our whole discussion must be about these. For good or bad enjoyment or pain is very important for our actions. So rather than throw off our human embodiment, Aristotle makes very clear that we operate through affect, that we operate as humans, that we suffer. And it's not that we need to avoid all that stuff. We make errors. We're not always right about things. Um, we're lucky when we do learn things the right way. Okay, we're at 43 minutes, doing pretty good. And there's quite a few pages left. We'll probably break soon. Section 10. Further, it is more difficult. This is book 2, chapter 2, book 2, chapter 3, section 10. Further, it is more difficult to fight pleasure than to fight spirit. And Heraclitus tells us how difficult it is to fight spirit. Now, both craft and virtue are in every case about what is more difficult, since a good result is even better when it is more difficult. Hence, for this reason also, the whole discussion, for virtue and political science alike, must consider pleasures and pains. For if we use these well, we shall be good, and if badly, bad. To sum up, virtue is about pleasures and pains. The actions that are its sources also increase it, or if they are done badly, ruin it. And its activity is about the same actions as those that are its sources. doing something well or poorly. Okay, Book 2, Chapter 4, Virtuous Actions versus Virtuous Character. Someone might be puzzled, however, about what we mean by saying that we become just by doing just actions and become temperate by doing temperate actions. For one might suppose that if we do grammatical or musical actions, we are grammarians or musicians. And similarly, if we do just or temperate actions, we are thereby just or temperate. But surely actions are not enough, even in the case of crafts. For it is possible to produce a grammatical result by chance or by following someone else's instructions. To be grammarians, then, we must both produce a grammatical result and produce it grammatically. That is to say, produce it in accord with the grammatical knowledge in us. Moreover, in any case, what is true of crafts is not true of virtues. For the products of a craft determine by their own qualities whether they have been produced well. And so it suffices that they have the right qualities when they have been produced. But for actions in accord with the virtues to be done temperately or justly, it does not suffice that they themselves have the right qualities. Rather, the agent must also be in the right state when he does them. For he must know that he is doing virtuous actions. First, no, I might have said four. First, he must know that he is doing virtuous actions. Second, he must decide on them, and decide on them for themselves. And third, he must also do them from a firm and unchanging state. That also seems like I may have read that. As conditions for having a craft, these three do not count, except for the bare knowing. As a condition for having a virtue, however, the knowing counts for nothing, or rather for only a little, whereas the other two conditions are very important, indeed all important, and we achieve these other two conditions by the frequent doing of just and temperate actions. Hence, actions are called just or temperate when they are the sort that a just or temperate person would do, but the just and temperate person is not the one who merely does these actions, but the one who also does them in the way in which just or temperate people do them. It is right then to say that a person comes to be just from doing just actions and temperate from doing temperate actions, for no one has the least prospect of becoming good from failing to do them. The many, however, do not do these actions. They take refuge in arguments, thinking that they are doing philosophy and that this is the way to become excellent people. They are like a sick person who listens attentively to the doctor but acts on none of his instructions. Such a course of treatment will not improve the state of the sick person's body, nor will the many improve the state of their souls by this attitude to philosophy. Five. Yeah, it's less than a page. We're going to do it. 5. Virtue of character, its genus. We may read it twice when we come back as well. Next, we must examine what virtue, but I'm not saying we will, so stick with this, we may not. Virtue of character, its genus. Next, we must examine what virtue is. Since there are three conditions arising in the soul, feelings, capacities, and states, virtue must be one of these. By feelings, I mean appetite, anger, fear, confidence, envy, joy, love, hate, longing, jealousy, pity, and in general, whatever implies pleasure or pain. By capacities, I mean what we have when we are said to be capable of these feelings, capable of being angry, for instance, or of being afraid, or of feeling pity. By states, I mean what we have when we are well or badly off in relation to feelings. If, for instance, our feeling is too intense or slack, we are badly off in relation to anger. But if it is intermediate, we are well off. The same is true in the other cases. First, then, neither virtues nor vices are feelings. For we are called excellent or base insofar as we have virtues or vices, not insofar as we have feelings. Further, we are neither praised nor blamed insofar as we have feelings. For we do not praise the angry or the frightened person, And do not blame the person who is simply angry, but only the person who is angry in a particular way. We are praised or blamed, however, insofar as we have virtues or vices. Further, we are angry and afraid without decision, but the virtues are decisions of some kind, or rather require decision. Besides, insofar as we have feelings, we are said to be moved. But insofar as we have virtues or vices, we are said to be in some condition rather than moved. For these reasons, the virtues are not capacities either. For we are neither called good nor called bad, nor are we praised or blamed, insofar as we are simply capable of feelings. Further, while we have capacities by nature, we do not become good or bad by nature. We have discussed this before. If then the virtues are neither feelings nor capacities, the remaining possibility is that they are states. And so we have said what the genus of virtue is. All right, we're at 51 minutes. I'm going to let this meeting process, upload the files, um, come back, and it's probably just one more episode to finish out Aristotle for us. And then I think Descartes will move fast. It might be like 2 or 3 episodes to do those lessons. Trying to do them tonight. So cool. I'll see y'all soon. The animals are resting, so I'm not gonna pay tax again. I don't want to disturb either of them. It's late at night, they're sleepy. So thanks for being here, guys. Thanks for listening all the way through. I hope you enjoyed it. We learned a lot about virtue ethics. Um, States of being, excellencies. Remember, virtue means excellence or arete, doing something well. Human virtue is about a virtue of the soul. Um, it's okay if you didn't like remember everything. You don't have to know all the details. As long as it made sense when you were processing it, then it's there and you're good. So we'll be back with the rest of it. Thanks again.